My name is Jim Basler. I'm a platform architect with Pivotal. And today we're going to talk about something new, very large Cloud Foundry environments and the special interest group that we just started up. So the last session in here was pretty deep and technical. This one's going to bring you up a little bit because I'm the only thing standing between you guys, of course, and the end of the evening and some libations. So, disclaimer, safe harbor statement, all of that. You guys have probably seen this ad nauseum. I'm not in product management, so don't believe anything I say if I give you any forward future statements about product direction. I'm just telling you what I'm hearing from customers, things that have been released already from product and development, and things that I'm allowed to say for the most part. So. Let's push the envelope on how we think about Cloud Foundry scale beyond a single foundation. Let's push the envelope about how we think about it. When we think about what it means for operators to plan, size, install, monitor, and manage multiple foundations. We've heard some of that already in the last couple days. What does it mean for developers to deploy their apps to multiple foundations? So we heard about that about Spinnaker today, pretty good stuff. How do you syndicate organizations and spaces across multiple foundations? Another thing that customers run into issues with. And how do microservices speak between foundations? That's one of the big common things I run into all the time. Do we need an API gateway to container networking between foundations? What's this NSXT stuff, right? So how do apps talk to services? When you think about services, which foundation are they on? Are they on foundation A or foundation B or on a dedicated services foundation, that kind of thing. So that's another concern that we have with multiple foundations. And how do you manage information on where those apps are deployed to? So Spinnaker, pretty cool. We learned a little bit about that recently and the catalog that it has for applications. Some pretty interesting stuff that's coming in that regard. So this kind of stuff falls into the domain of the newly formed very large Cloud Foundry environment special interest group. So I talk about them as heavyweights because they're typically tens of thousands of AIs, or an AI is a container, and they typically have over a dozen foundations. And they have challenges, and the challenges that they are sharing with us are things I'm going to go over in a little bit. And there's some potential solutions that we've seen this week and things that are going to be coming. But more importantly, I think it's important with these special interest groups and any user group is to dream big and think about the art of the possible. So I've heard some really interesting things from some of the participants in the special interest group, ideas that they have about how Cloud Foundry and multiple foundations could work better for them. And I'm going to share some of those things as we go. So I'm also going to talk about some of the work that has gone in the last year or so. So it's not all stuff that's future looking. So what is VLCFE? It's really about multiple foundations hosting tens of thousands of applications. It's a focus on massive scale, specific tech, organizational, and process challenges. How many people are in the regular Cloud Foundry user group? Anybody participate on the remote calls? If you don't, stop by the Pivotal booth. Darmaine Drewis leads that group. It's really interesting. There's a lot of good stuff that comes out. The special interest group really focuses on big issues. So the goals it's really to collaborate. We want to learn and provide input to product management, really to improve capabilities, and potentially build collaborative solutions. Customers working together, right? And it could be process solutions or organization ideas. It could be white papers, things like that. Or it could be technical solutions. Maybe it's a community project they're working on that's going to be showing up in a repo somewhere that everybody can contribute to. And the idea is to share learnings at major user conferences like this one. So it's relatively new. So the SIG, the VLCFE SIG Cohort group really started, it started a few months ago, but the first real meeting came last week. So we had 5 companies that came on the call, and it's an initial cohort group. The whole idea behind the initial cohort group is we want to make sure that we iterate and we learn. So the initial cohort group kind of takes some of the hard knocks as we go, as we organize, refine the mission statement, the purpose, the goals of the group, and then we invite more people. So there are a lot more people, a lot more companies, organizations than 5 that are running very large Cloud Foundry environments. And if you're not in the group yet, don't worry, we're going to find you, we're going to reach out to you, and feel free to reach out to us with your interest. It's going to grow. So we have a lot of participant feedback that's come through those calls, and it's really on the direction of how it should be run. We have a good survey summary, so I'm going to share some of the results of the survey. We sent out a survey to the 5 companies and got some pretty good answers back, some interesting feedback on the challenges they're running into. And there's a few themes, just a couple themes that I'm going to talk about today that affect everyone. So when we talk about large Cloud Foundry environments, you look at it, like a gauge, 0 to 100,000 AIs. The initial cohorts are, you've got one that's greater than 18,000, most that are greater than 21,000, and you've got another organization that is looking to get over 50,000 AIs or containers running in just a couple of years. So these guys are running some pretty big things, and all of them have over a dozen foundations. So before we get into the challenges that the special interest group has shared, I think it'd be good to talk about how far we've come in the last 5 years. 5 years ago, PCF hardly existed, right? I mean, it's fairly new. I was talking to an enterprise architect at a big jelly and jam manufacturer in the country, and I worked for another company, and this architect said, hey, you guys have all these JEE servers. This other company I worked for, we did JEE servers. And he said, it's great, we run them on Linux, but you know what? You guys support HP Unix, Itanium, AIX, Linux, Windows, all of that. We want you guys to handle the operating system patches. And instead of just, Java apps, we want to deploy PHP, we want to deploy, some other things like Go apps and things like that. And we think that as a company, you guys should just support all of that. I kind of laughed at the guy. That was 5 years ago, and there really wasn't anything in the marketplace that did that, right? I mean, fast forward, to 4 years ago, and this interesting thing called Cloud Foundry came out, right? That does all this stuff. You can run .NET. You can run, almost any build pack is out there to support a language and a framework for what people are developing applications with today. And not only that, but it'll patch everything underneath, right? Bosch Director will go ahead and install this stuff for you. You get an operating system patch and a stem cell, and the stem cell will go ahead and do a rolling upgrade, right? Canary deploys, and it automates all of that. So the enterprise architect I was speaking with at this large food manufacturer, that's what they were looking for. And I heard about it 4 years ago, and it caused me to leave the Java EE app vendor and come to work for Pivotal because, hey, we've got that today. That's pretty cool stuff. So Cloud Foundry, it's kind of interesting. It's really been focusing mostly on the Fortune 500, the developer experience for that. So for the last few years, it's all about CF push, taking the friction out of the development experience for Fortune 500. Not everybody's Fortune 500, right? So in the meantime, people have had to piece together solutions. Gosh, you go to any DevOps days 2 years ago, and everybody's talking about Docker. It was Docker, Docker, Docker. And how do you fill the gaps around the edges of Docker? Things like Swarm were being talked about. Kubernetes last year at DevOps, everybody talked about Kubernetes and the gaps, that are around Kubernetes and what do we do for that. So, you've seen in the past very large DevOps organizations. Cloud Foundry tackled that, right? We made it easy for developers and we did a lot of hyper automation. Kubernetes is coming, that's on Bosch today too. We're gonna make that an easier experience for people doing DevOps. I posted this on Twitter. I didn't get any love for it. I thought it was kind of funny. In my best Jeff Foxworthy voice, there are teams that actually have DevOps teams that are bigger than their development teams. That's not, that's not digital transformation, right? That's digital transformation redneck stuff. But to be fair, a lot of companies are trying to get their stuff into the cloud. And you know what? Kubernetes does a really good job of that because you have so many ways to configure it. So you can handle some of these traditional workloads where Cloud Foundry took an opinionated view and really took the work out of it for developers. So we had a very, a happy path for developers to do things. So surprising how many organizations are doing just custom application development, and their DevOps teams are still bigger than their developer teams just for those use cases. It's just not right. How many people are running Cloud Foundry today? Yeah, quite a few. How many are running Kubernetes? Okay, less than I thought. I figured we'd see more Kubernetes running too. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You guys know Cloud Foundry. The automation that's built into it makes it significantly easier for developers to work. So you've got the day one capabilities of installing it, making it a lot easier. You stand up Ops Manager, you configure Bosh Director, and it installs, anywhere between 30 and hundreds of different virtual machines to run your applications at scale. And then it provides all these different services. So the platform does these things. There was a session on CredHub just previously. There's org spaces, roles, permissions that are built in for role-based stuff, quotas. You've probably seen some sessions on concourse. There's this entire stack that's dedicated to making it just run good. So we've made, a lot of progress just in 5 years. And VMware was working on it before it spun out into Pivotal, but it's pretty amazing what's been going on. And a lot of this stuff is going to start spinning out and going over to Kubernetes, like Knative. You saw Knative, the build pack capabilities. That's going to simplify it for Kubernetes. So it's pretty cool. We got a lot of stuff going on. We're building really big foundations. We get the question a lot, well, how big can my foundation be? Why stop at just a few thousand apps? There was a study done in 2016. It's posted on one of our blogs, and it really studies, it baselines the performance of Cloud Foundry. 250,000 containers running on GCP. Quite a few. You couldn't do that on-prem. There's some specific limitations in some of the on-prem technologies on the number of hosts you can do. We've solved some of that with multi-CPI, being able to attach more than one vCenter now. OpenStack the same way, that's been solved. So 2 years ago, we did this on GCP just to find out where the bottlenecks were. So they would incrementally add more AIs and workload. It was really a mixed workload. They were very, very large Diego cells, and they found, they really found some bottlenecks in the database. They had to scale that up more than they thought. They had to scale up, of course, the Go routers, Cloud Controller APIs, all that stuff. So pretty good stuff. We found out that it scales pretty darn good, up to 250K. We don't see a lot of people going to 250,000 application instances still, though. So with Google testing it to 250K, with us doing that on Google, I think we're pretty well ahead of the curve on these very large foundations. So the big issue then is just because you can create a really large foundation, doesn't mean you should. What are the ramifications of creating these very large foundations? And the initial survey asked about the challenge of managing these large foundations. And it could probably be called an anti-pattern, an Uber Foundation anti-pattern today. That might change in the future. But there are some really specific challenges, and this is the feedback we got from the special interest group. Scaling the platform, say incrementing the number of Diego cells to handle additional containers, it takes a lot of time to apply changes. Anybody out here feel that pain at all? No? Oh, Nick, you don't. Yeah. So especially if you're talking about containers in the thousands, you can feel the pain sometimes in the hundreds. In many cases, we were told by the SIG that they expect long deploy times whenever they apply changes. So that's definitely one of the challenges we've seen and a knock against going with very large foundations. The larger the foundation, the less you really want to be you want to keep it up and continuously upgrading it, right? Because it's more painful, and you got to do it. You only have so many cycles, so in that the deltas become larger, and then it becomes even more difficult to keep it upgraded. That's very difficult. So we've got some people that are working in product management that are looking at that, looking at upgrades and what it takes to do things between minor versions to make those experiences a lot easier. We also hear about the notion of blast radius. So even if we wanted to create an Uber foundation, a really big one, it exposes us to a large blast radius. So if something fails in an upgrade or a catastrophic event occurs, it could really wreak havoc. So we've got an equation now for estimating the duration of a repave, and the rest of the session, I'm going to break this equation down and solve it with you guys. All right, so nobody ran. Darn, I was hoping to end early. Okay, so how big should my foundation be? A gentleman named Ford Donald, he's a director in our PCF Solutions team, talks a lot about blast radius, and I think that's really good input when you're talking about how big your foundation should be. Let's look at a simple formula, not the Schrodinger equation. We're not doing quantum mechanics today, right? This will take you back to your high school algebra days. The equation of a line, right? Y equals mx plus b. B is that fixed point in the y-intercept when x equals 0. So at the very bottom, basically, if I build this out, what you'll see is the variable grows. The variable is going to be Diego cells, Go routers, things like that. The fixed pieces are, probably about 30, 50 VMs or so that handle the overhead, right? Cloud Controller API, MySQL, things like that. So it takes about, say, 1.5 hours in order to do a repave or to update a stem cell, right? When you're doing something with 0 Diego cells, if you have no tiles deployed. 1.5 hours. And your mileage is going to vary depending on whether you're using GCP, vSphere, or whatever. If we can repave 50 VMs per hour, that's the slope of the line. So y equals mx plus b. If we've got, say, 250 cells running about, say, 20 AIs or 20 containers per cell for 5,000 AIs, we can expect maybe 6.5 hours duration or so. Again, your mileage is going to vary a little bit. So if we think about the duration of a repave, if you're doing an update, a stem cell, if you're over 5,000 AIs, and depending on your infrastructure, maybe it's over 3,000 AIs, those could take quite a long time. And what do you really want to do? You want to fail fast. If you're going to fail, you'd like to fail fast. And sometimes, you have to go through the entire process of applying changes before you actually see, something that doesn't work out. So if you look at it, blast radius, just to give us some context, Cloud Foundry is meant to be always on, meaning no downtime, right? We don't want any downtime, even during upgrades. Murphy's Law says that, hey, if something's going to fail, it probably will. So we should assume that, hey, you know what? At some point, maybe this thing could fail, and we should be prepared for that failure. So that's the basis of this little exercise. So what if I did have 25,000 AIs, like the participants in our special interest group? If we did, and we divvy those up, 20 AIs per cell, say it's a Spring application, each AI or container needs about 1 gig of RAM, right? Then we'd have 1,250 cells that we would have to put in there. 1,250 divided by 50 for 50 cells per hour gives us 25 hours for the variable part, and then plus 1.5, which is pretty darn, negligible for the fixed part. So 26.5 hours, and if that thing goes down, 100% outage. Nobody wants to be in a situation like that, right? So what if you split that into two, and you see that in an active-active scenario or a active-passive, a DR type scenario, 12,500 AIs divided, on each. We'll get back to that a little bit later about how it could be a real issue with the amount of extra capacity you might need to carry on each to handle failure. But 12.5 hours plus 1.5, you're talking about 14 hours, so almost half. And if you get it down to 3, same thing. 9.5, we're still not within an 8-hour workday. But if you get it down to 5, then you get down to an 8-hour workday, 6.5 hours. So 250 cells, much more manageable. If you lose one foundation, you only need about 60 or so cells available in each of the other foundations to pick up the slack. Whereas in the 50% outage model, right, your blast radius would say that you've got to double up every one of those foundations. That could be a real waste of resources. So this kind of drives the behavior of our customers, the way the product is today, to do multiple foundations. Really, it's about making sure that they can get their upgrades done fast enough, but also the blast radius that they need to be considering for that. All right, you guys probably saw some pretty cool stuff on this. Is anybody using the review pending changes, the differential deploy feature yet? One person? Okay. Couple people. So yeah, pretty neat stuff. Relatively new. 2.2, I think it was out. 2.3 at 1 GA. So what this does is it makes it easier so you can see the dependencies, so that you can do differential deploys and say, I just want to upgrade this one deployment. I don't want to go through the whole thing. So the idea is it's going to be faster. So if you see this little thing in the top right, cumulative duration of selected pending changes, 1.75 hours, that's on my wish list. That's not actually in the product. I'd like to see it, tell me, hey, how long is this change going to take at some point? All right, so managing multiple foundations, this is the second biggest challenge that we saw as a theme coming back from the special interest group, the first meeting in the survey. So managing multiple foundations with just Pivotal Application Service Diego cells and supporting those components, that's hard enough, right? The Cohort group is interested in things like distributed management of foundations across cloud providers, and then also multiple public cloud providers. Pretty interesting stuff. We're doing multi-CPI now. It's vSphere and OpenStack. It'll be interesting to see in the future what we can do with distributed types of foundations. But there's also this thing about internal services that need to be taken care of, enterprise services. Nobody comes into Cloud Foundry with a clean room without any type of persistent services they need to use or message queuing or things like that. They're not always going to go out and procure a third-party ISV tile. So one of the things that, that's a concern for special interest group people is, hey, we've got, DB2 on the mainframe we have to worry about. We've got an Oracle rack cluster sitting on Exadata we have to deal with. How do we go ahead and enable those things? So you guys might have seen some things around OSB API, the Open Service Broker API, and some of the interesting things that are being done with Kibosh to enable running Helm charts on PKS. So keep an eye out for that kind of stuff. Very interesting. So multi-foundation is pretty challenging. Just by show of hands, how many people here have, say, 3 foundations? Okay, the majority. How about a dozen foundations? A few of you. Okay, cool. More than 30. They're not here. That just shows that they're not here. We've got one person, one group, organization in our special interest group that has over 30 foundations that they have to manage. And some of that has to do with data residency and things like that in foreign countries. So, just to back up a little bit, there is some really interesting stuff that's out there today. Our PCFS team, PCF Solutions team that does the platform dojos, they're amazing. They're rock stars, and I'm sure most people would agree to that when they engage them. They bring these best practices, CI/CD pipelines, CF management, written by big contributors. There's a lot of contributors. Caleb Washburn, who else? Anwar Chirkatil is pretty big into that. Hayden Ryan. So we've got people that you guys have probably heard of in those platform dojos that are doing stuff like this. So a big problem is managing the metadata that's associated with Cloud Foundry. If I have multiple foundations, how do I declaratively, say, here are my orgs, here are my spaces, the private domains I'm using, the application security groups, and all of that, and how do I get those, somewhere that can be taken advantage of every foundation that I stand up. So that's done in YAML, and it can be in source control, and you can use a CI/CD pipeline in order to syndicate that information to multiple foundations. So quite a few of our special interest group people are using this, and it's good stuff. I love it because it's Git, and you really want things to be declarative instead of imperative, right? Infrastructure as service, infrastructure code, that kind of thing. And then how many people are using Concourse today? Almost everybody. Yeah, that's popular. Concourse hasn't been around that long either. So Concourse, at a very high level, it's all about resources, jobs, being able to run tasks and things like that. I think Concourse is perfect for systems. I mean, it's very simple for systems people to get their heads around. They don't have to deal with something like Jenkins or Bamboo, Travis, anything like that. This is really built for PCF automation. We have a team. Has anybody heard of Platform Automation, PCF Automation team? Okay, they're starting to get engaged, right, in some of the platform dojos that are taking place right now. Keep an eye on that space. Pretty interesting stuff and what they're doing to take some of the boilerplate, the fine-grained stuff, it seems, out of Concourse and get it closer to the product. So it's easier for you to work with the product like OM in order to do things with Cloud Foundry. So it's going to simplify the Concourse pipelines, and then it's also going to make it easier to use other pipeline type tools, other CD tools besides Concourse. Deployadactyl. Anybody using Deployadactyl at all? Nobody. Okay. This comes from Compose Labs, which is Allstate. They created this in order to manage applications. So what this does, it's a lot like Spinnaker. This came before Spinnaker and the Cloud Foundry module was available. So it makes it easy to get a list of Cloud Foundry instances, multiple foundations. It keeps track of the APIs for the Cloud Controller API. It makes sure that they're available, and it logs into each instance on your behalf with a service account. And then it'll concurrently execute an operation like CF push on it. If it fails, it'll automatically revert. So in the absence of product capabilities, we've had some really cool stuff coming out from customers that are doing this kind of stuff. All right. So what are we hearing from devs? Some of what we're hearing is they always want to keep it simple, right? But with an opinionated, happy path. We want to make it super simple for them. Devs shouldn't have to have a list of APIs in their back pocket for each foundation. We've heard that. They want to be able to deploy their applications, right? And maybe with an application manifest. And then the application manifest would basically say, hey, I want this plan for my application, bronze, silver, gold. I want just a single deploy for dev maybe, or I want high availability, and I want the plan to resolve to something real, to the foundations that you guys manage on the back end. As a dev, I don't want to deal with that kind of stuff. Or maybe I need it to also have disaster recovery also. The platform should just respond to the request and place the app appropriately. Schedule it on the foundations it should be. And a lot of this stuff is, pie in the sky today, art of the possible, but things that would really make this interesting. Should be easy to configure those apps, regardless of where the platform places them. They should be all services too, right? There's nothing worse than, hey, you've got this great automated platform for deploying your applications, but services are difficult. I got to put in a service ticket for every database change I need. That just slows everything down. And then marketplace services should be consistent across environments. For smaller organizations, maybe your foundation has all your marketplace services in it. For larger organizations, you may not want to deploy those services in every foundation for availability. You might want to put one in Foundation A, one in Foundation B. Shouldn't the marketplace have a composite view of those things? Maybe it's a composite UI. That's pretty important. And when you deploy your application, you don't have to deal with the issues with that. So the platform really decides that. So I think a lot about the art of the possible and dreaming big on this stuff. And we're going back to the moon. You guys heard about SpaceX and what they're doing. They're going to send somebody around the moon. Apparently, they have to reinvent all the technology for it because vacuum tube solutions they don't exist anymore. So they got to write software. So when we dream big about going back to the moon, doing things like that, what if a foundation could simply read a known good configuration in JSON templates from like a Git repository? What if you just stood up a foundation ops manager director and you pointed it to something and it bootstrapped all of its configuration based on known values? Infrastructure as code, right? That'd be pretty interesting. What if in that configuration also it automatically recognizes it's part of a larger federation of foundations so that view in Apps Manager in the marketplace would automatically be a composite view? What if there's a proxy URL or even a GTM URL that you hit that'll automatically push your application to one of those Cloud Controller APIs? But those Cloud Controller APIs are cognizant of the other Cloud Controller APIs and all the other foundations, and they work together to ensure your service level availability. That'd be pretty interesting. What if we could enable the foundations to federate and handle those types of SLAs? And what if you could prioritize a particular IaaS? What if you're running your foundation, say you got one foundation on vSphere, you got another one on Azure, and another one on GCP, and they're federated? What if you could set up rules that would automatically redistribute and balance your application instances based on performance or cost metrics, things like that? We know things fluctuate. So interestingly, just last week, Elon Musk introduced this guy, Yasuka Maezawa. He's the founder of the online Japanese clothing company Zozo, as his first customer for a voyage around the moon aboard a SpaceX rocket, probably around 2023. Pretty cool stuff. In the special interest group, we don't know who we're going to launch into space yet, right? But it's going to be a great place for very large customers to kind of keep their finger on the pulse of what Pivotal is doing, what other customers are doing, and just get a really good feel for land and stay abreast on developments. It's really, the whole VLCFE was created to look at those challenges, all the ones I talked about. We're forming up new teams. You guys have probably talked to some of them, not knowingly. They've been doing some presentations. There's some internal Slack channels that are talking about multi-foundation now. Health Watch, right? You saw Health Watch showing multi-foundations there. Pretty cool stuff. Apps Manager team is looking at this kind of stuff. Spinnaker is all about multi-foundation today. So we're forming up all these new teams. Engage with your Pivotal platform architects. They'll know how to get you into the VLCFE SIG if you're interested and learn about the art of the possible. So thank you guys for coming to the very last session of the day, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your time in DC. And stop by the Pivotal booth tomorrow if you want to learn more about this stuff. So thank you.